A student cheats and betrays her teacher's trust, but karma catches her in exams. From the outside, Clara appeared flawless. At just 17, she was the pride of her school, sharp-minded, eloquent, and with grades that impressed even the strictest of teachers. She had a disarming smile that made her classmates admire her, and an aura of confidence that left her teachers convinced she was destined for greatness. But behind her polished demeanor, Clara carried a secret. She was not as brilliant as her marks suggested. Instead, she was a master manipulator who had discovered ways to bend rules, twist sympathy, and exploit trust to secure her place at the top. Her favorite victim was Mr. Dawson, her literature teacher. A kind man with a soft heart, he believed Clara's every excuse, whether it was about her late submissions or sudden illnesses. Clara knew how to look vulnerable, how to let tears well up at the perfect moment, and how to weave stories that sounded too tragic to doubt. And while Mr. Dawson pitied her, Clara laughed inwardly, knowing she was playing a dangerous game that gave her the illusion of control. What she didn't realize was that every lie she told was laying a foundation for the storm waiting to destroy her carefully built facade. Mr. Dawson had been teaching for over 20 years, yet something about Clara tugged at his compassion more than any other student ever had. She often told him of personal struggles, financial problems at home, a sick relative, or sleepless nights filled with anxiety. These stories softened him, and in turn he granted her leniencies no other student received. Clara's classmates noticed. Whispers began in the hallways, accusing her of favoritism, but none dared confront her openly. Mr. Dawson dismissed the gossip as mere jealousy, blind to the possibility that his most trusted pupil was deceiving him. When Clara's essays received high marks despite being suspiciously similar to published works, he convinced himself that her brilliance simply outshone the rest. Clara thrived in this environment, feeding off the admiration and trust. Each time she successfully tricked her teacher, she felt invincible. But with each success came arrogance, an arrogance that grew like a shadow behind her smile. Instead of gratitude, she saw Mr. Dawson's kindness as weakness, a tool she could wield. What she failed to grasp, however, was that trust is not infinite. Even the gentlest hearts can reach a breaking point, and Clara was inching ever closer to awakening a truth she was not prepared to face. The whispers about Clara grew louder as the months passed. Some students claimed to have seen her copying notes from websites word for word. Others swore they had caught her sneaking glances at hidden cheat sheets during tests. Yet none of them dared to bring their suspicions directly to Mr. Dawson. They feared that his admiration for Clara would only make him defend her more fiercely. Among her classmates, jealousy mixed with frustration. They worked tirelessly, staying up late to prepare for exams, while Clara seemed to glide effortlessly to the top. Those who once admired her brilliance began to resent her. The murmurs in the cafeteria, the pointed stares in the hallways, and the subtle exclusion during group activities. Clara noticed them all, but dismissed them with a smirk. She believed envy was a natural consequence of her supposed genius. What Clara didn't realize was that even the most carefully hidden lies eventually leave cracks. Her classmates might have lacked the courage to expose her, but suspicion had been planted and it was spreading. Each whisper was a thread unraveling the mask she wore so proudly. And once those threads pulled loose, her entire disguise would be at risk of collapsing. Clara's lies became second nature. She no longer paused to consider her fabrications. They slipped from her lips as easily as the truth. When Mr. Dawson questioned why she had not completed a reading assignment, she claimed her grandmother had been hospitalized. When a classmate challenged her in a debate, she spun a tale of exhaustion and emotional distress to excuse her lack of preparation. The more she lied, the bolder she became. Clara forged medical notes, invented family crises, and even manipulated her friends into covering for her. She had become a storyteller in every sense, one who wove fiction so seamlessly that even she sometimes believed it. But while her lies grew stronger, her actual knowledge remained fragile. Beneath the surface, Clara's academic foundation was crumbling, and she had no real skill to support the image she projected. The irony of her situation was cruel. She had convinced everyone she was exceptional, yet she herself lived in constant fear of exposure. Every test, every oral presentation, every pop quiz was a potential landmine. Still, she pressed forward, blinded by her thirst for admiration and recognition, unaware that the web she had spun so skillfully was now tightening around her like a noose. Mr. Dawson's blind faith began to falter one afternoon. Clara had submitted an essay on Shakespeare that seemed far too advanced for her usual work. The vocabulary was sophisticated, the arguments eloquent, the analysis unusually deep. At first, Mr. Dawson felt a surge of pride. His pupil had outdone herself. But when he stumbled upon a similar essay online, unease crept into his mind. He tried to brush the thought aside. Clara had always been special, hadn't she? Perhaps she had simply grown in her skills. But doubt lingered like a shadow, refusing to leave. For the first time, he began to observe her more closely, watching the way her eyes darted during tests, noticing the excuses that seemed to appear too conveniently, too often. Still, his heart resisted the truth. He reminded himself of her supposed hardships, of the tears she had shed in his office, of the many times she had seemed so vulnerable. Could such a girl truly deceive him so thoroughly? He wanted to believe in her. He needed to. But even the kindest hearts cannot ignore the nagging voice of suspicion forever, and Mr. Dawson's patience was wearing thin. The real turning point came during a class presentation. Each student was tasked with analyzing a classic novel of their choice. When it was Clara's turn, she walked confidently to the front of the class. Clutching neatly written cue cards, she spoke with passion, quoting passages and offering insights that left her classmates stunned. But Mr. Dawson noticed something others did not. Her eyes never left the cards. She read line by line, never once expanding or elaborating beyond the words written. At the end of her presentation, he asked her a simple question. "Clara, could you explain how the author's themes connect to modern society?" For the first time, she froze. Her face went pale, and her confident smile faltered. She stumbled over her words, muttering vague phrases that made no sense. The room was silent, her classmates watching eagerly, sensing weakness at last. Mr. Dawson felt his chest tighten. The truth was clawing its way into the light. Clara was not the genius he believed her to be. She was simply skilled at reciting words that weren't her own. It was in that moment that he realized he had been deceived, and though he said nothing immediately, his resolve hardened. He would no longer allow himself to be played for a fool. Though Mr. Dawson had uncovered the truth, he chose not to confront Clara right away. Instead, he waited, watching her with a new perspective. Every late excuse, every sudden illness, every miraculous recovery seemed transparent now. Clara, unaware of the shift, continued her charade as if nothing had changed. But beneath the surface, the atmosphere had shifted. Mr. Dawson began preparing subtle tests to challenge her. He gave pop quizzes with questions that couldn't be answered with memorized notes. He asked follow-up questions during class to gauge her true understanding. Time and again, Clara faltered. Her mask slipped in small ways, enough for Mr. Dawson to confirm what he already suspected, but not yet enough to expose her fully. For Clara, life felt unchanged. She still basked in the admiration of some and shrugged off the resentment of others. But the storm was coming, though she could not see it. Her lies had carried her this far. But the exams were approaching, and there would be no cue cards, no forged notes, no sympathetic stories to save her then. The calm before the storm was deceptive, and Clara stood unknowingly at the edge of a downfall that would shatter her carefully constructed world. As the exam season drew closer, Clara's confidence began to waver. She had always managed to talk her way out of difficult assignments, but she knew written exams offered no room for excuses. Her classmates studied feverishly, forming groups, exchanging notes, and drilling each other with practice questions. Clara, however, pretended she didn't need to prepare. She walked through the corridors with an air of superiority, scoffing at the sight of exhausted faces buried in textbooks. But in the quiet of her room, panic gnawed at her. The notes she tried to review seemed like gibberish. The concepts she had parroted in essays meant little when she was forced to understand them on her own. She attempted to memorize key phrases, but the weight of the material was crushing. For the first time, Clara felt the edges of her carefully built facade fraying. Her lies had bought her time, but they hadn't built knowledge. Deep down, she knew she was standing on fragile ground. Each day that passed brought her closer to an exam she couldn't manipulate. Yet, instead of confessing or seeking genuine help, she doubled down, determined to bluff her way through, unaware that fate was already preparing her punishment. Mr. Dawson, though silent, had grown vigilant. He saw through Clara's feigned calmness. Her confident strides were a mask for trembling hands, her forced laughter a shield for sleepless nights. He decided the exams would reveal everything, not through confrontation, but through Clara's own undoing. To ensure fairness, he requested stricter invigilation for the upcoming tests. Additional teachers would supervise, and students would sit apart. Cheating, which Clara had relied on in subtle forms, would be nearly impossible. He didn't announce these measures openly, but word spread among the students. Clara dismissed it as irrelevant, but somewhere inside, unease stirred. On the surface, Mr. Dawson treated Clara no differently. He continued to smile kindly, though his questions in class remained sharp and probing. Clara could feel his eyes on her more than ever, and it unnerved her. The teacher who once seemed gullible now radiated quiet authority, and that shift left her restless. The exams were only days away, and the weight of judgment loomed. Clara sensed that Mr. Dawson knew more than he let on. For the first time she felt like prey under the gaze of a hunter, her lies no longer her weapons but her vulnerabilities. The night before the first exam, Clara sat at her desk staring at the blank pages of her notebook. She had tried for hours to cram facts into her memory, but her mind refused to cooperate. The silence of her room pressed down on her like a heavy blanket. For once, the stories she fabricated for sympathy offered no comfort. There was no excuse she could invent that would erase her failure if she faltered in the exam hall. Her reflection in the mirror looked foreign. Her once bright eyes now carried dark circles, and her confident smile had been replaced with a nervous twitch. Still, she clung to denial. Clara whispered to herself that she could bluff her way through. She convinced herself that if she wrote enough flowery words, she could confuse the examiners into awarding her marks. Yet, somewhere deep inside, she knew this was a lie too big to sustain. The pressure was unbearable, and for the first time in years she regretted her choices. But pride is a cruel master, and Clara's pride refused to let her admit defeat. Instead, she closed her books, crawled into bed, and promised herself she would somehow survive tomorrow. The classroom was eerily silent on the morning of the exam. The smell of sharpened pencils, the shuffle of papers, and the nervous coughs of anxious students filled the air. Clara walked in with her head high, but her stomach churned with dread. She sat at her assigned desk, isolated from her classmates with nothing but the exam paper before her. When the invigilator signaled to begin, Clara's confidence shattered. The first question stared back at her like an accusation, demanding knowledge she didn't possess. She scribbled nonsense, filling lines with vague phrases that sounded academic but meant little. She glanced around desperately, but the strict seating arrangement made even a subtle peek impossible. Sweat gathered on her forehead, her hand trembling as she wrote. Time slipped through her fingers and the blank spaces on her paper grew more damning with each passing minute. The whispers of her classmates, the suspicion in their eyes, and Mr. Dawson's quiet scrutiny seemed to echo in her mind. For the first time, Clara realized the magnitude of her deception. Her lies had carried her into the spotlight, but now, under the harsh glare of truth, there was no place left to hide. As the exam dragged on, Clara's composure disintegrated. The confident student her peers once envied now looked pale, disheveled, and lost. She chewed on her pen cap nervously, her once steady handwriting reduced to frantic scrawls. Around her, other students bent over their papers with determined focus, their pens racing with purpose. Clara, meanwhile, drowned in a sea of confusion. She tried to recall snippets from the essays she had plagiarized, but without understanding, the words jumbled together meaninglessly. Her answers were hollow, filled with rehearsed lines that failed to address the questions. The invigilators noticed her distress, whispering among themselves, but kept their eyes sharp on her movements. Mr. Dawson, seated at the back of the hall, watched with quiet resignation. He didn't feel triumph in her struggle. He felt sorrow. He had wanted to believe in Clara, had wanted her brilliance to be real. But now the truth revealed itself plainly. She had built her success on deception, and the weight of her lies had finally collapsed upon her. By the time the bell rang, Clara's paper was a mess of half-answers and rambling nonsense. She knew then that the storm she had long ignored had arrived, and it was merciless. When the exam papers were collected, Clara's heart pounded with dread. She walked out of the classroom with her head low, avoiding the eyes of her classmates. Whispers chased her down the hall, hushed but sharp enough to cut. Students who once envied her brilliance now exchanged knowing smirks. They had seen her struggle, and their suspicions were confirmed. Clara tried to keep her mask intact. She told herself it was only one exam and that she could recover in the others. Yet, deep down, she knew she had been exposed. The lies that once shielded her had abandoned her in the one place they mattered most. At home, she locked herself in her room, pacing like a trapped animal. Every excuse she had ever used ran through her mind, but none could cover the weight of her failure. For the first time, Clara felt powerless. Her entire identity, the perfect student, the admired prodigy, was crumbling. The silence of her house pressed heavily upon her. No sympathetic teacher, no fabricated story, no forged note could save her now. She had finally reached the one battlefield where manipulation was useless, and defeat was inevitable. A week later, the exam results were released. Clara sat rigid at her desk as the teacher handed back the graded papers. Her classmates buzzed with nervous chatter, flipping through pages to see their marks. When Clara's paper landed before her, her breath caught. Red ink sprawled across the pages, circling mistakes, striking through nonsense, and marking her answers as irrelevant. At the top of the page, her score glared at her like a sentence, 32%. A failing grade. Her classmates didn't need to see the number to know the truth. Clara's face gave it away. Her lips trembled, her eyes darted, and her once proud posture slumped into defeat. The whispers began again, louder this time, carrying hints of satisfaction. Some students smirked openly, remembering the arrogance with which she had dismissed their hard work. Others looked at her with pity, realizing that beneath the facade Clara had been nothing more than a frightened girl caught in her own lies. Clara wanted to disappear. Her hands clenched the paper so tightly it crumpled, but no amount of force could erase the truth it bore. The prodigy had fallen, and everyone now knew her brilliance was nothing but an illusion. Later that day, Mr. Dawson called Clara into his office. She entered hesitantly, clutching her books as though they could shield her. He sat across from her, his eyes calm but heavy with disappointment. For a long moment he said nothing, letting the silence weigh on her until she squirmed. "Clara," he began softly, "I trusted you. I believed in you when others doubted, but the exam has shown me the truth I didn't want to see." Clara's defenses rose quickly. She mumbled excuses about stress, about family troubles, about being unwell. But Mr. Dawson shook his head. "This isn't about excuses anymore. This is about honesty. You lied, Clara, not just to me, but to yourself, and now the lies have caught up with you." Tears welled in her eyes, but not from remorse. They were born of fear of losing everything she had worked for, even if it had been built on deception. Mr. Dawson leaned forward, his voice firm yet kind. "You still have a choice. You can keep lying and let this destroy you, or you can face the truth and rebuild. But understand this, trust, once broken, is not easily mended." His words echoed in Clara's mind long after she left the room. News of Clara's failure spread quickly through the school. Students who had once envied her perfection now reveled in her downfall. The girl who once strutted with confidence now walked with her eyes fixed on the ground. Her former friends distanced themselves, unwilling to be associated with someone whose glory had turned to shame. Some classmates were cruel, mocking her with whispers of fraud and liar. Others, more forgiving, tried to sympathize, but their pity felt like salt on an open wound. Clara, who once thrived on attention, now dreaded it. Every stare felt like an accusation, every laugh like a blade. Group projects became nightmares. No one wanted her as a partner, fearing she would drag them down. Even the teachers, though polite, treated her differently. The warmth that once accompanied their praise was replaced by cool professionalism. She had become invisible, stripped of the admiration she had so carefully stolen. The worst part wasn't the mockery, nor the isolation. It was the knowledge that she had done this to herself. No enemy had betrayed her, no rival had sabotaged her. Clara's downfall was her own creation, a prison built from her own lies. At home, Clara's parents received the news with shock. They had believed their daughter was a rising star, destined for scholarships and accolades. But the truth broke them. Disappointment etched itself into their faces as they confronted her. "Why didn't you just study? Why all the lies?" her mother asked, her voice trembling. Clara had no answer. She sat silently, tears streaming down her face as her father paced the room in frustration. The weight of their disapproval crushed her more than the failing grade ever could. For the first time, Clara truly felt the cost of her deception. It wasn't just her reputation at stake, it was the trust of her family, the respect of her peers, and the belief of her teacher. She had traded all of it for the fleeting thrill of false praise. At night she lay awake replaying every moment, the forged notes, the fabricated stories, the manipulative tears. Each memory struck her like a stone, building a wall of regret around her. She realized she hadn't just failed an exam, she had failed herself. Karma had come, not with dramatic vengeance, but with quiet inevitability, and Clara was left with the heavy silence of her own undoing. Clara's world had shrunk to silence. No more whispered admiration in the hallways, no more special praise from teachers, no more envious glances from her peers. She sat at the back of the class now, unnoticed, her once bright aura dimmed into a shadow. Each day felt heavier than the last. The breaking point came when she overheard two younger students in the library whispering her name. "Isn't she the one who cheated? The one who pretended to be smart?" Their words cut deeper than knives. Clara fled to the restroom, locked herself in a stall, and wept uncontrollably. For the first time she admitted the truth, not to others, but to herself. She had never been the brilliant student everyone thought she was. She had been a liar, weaving stories to hide her weaknesses. And now, stripped of her lies, she had nothing left. It was in that moment, staring at her tear-streaked reflection in the mirror, that Clara finally understood. She couldn't keep running. She couldn't keep hiding. If she wanted to rebuild, she would have to face the truth head-on, no matter how painful. The road to redemption was not easy. Clara began with small steps, attending extra tutoring sessions, asking questions in class and admitting when she didn't understand. At first, her teachers eyed her with suspicion, unsure whether this change was genuine or just another performance. But over time they saw her effort was real. Mr. Dawson, though cautious, agreed to help her. He assigned her reading tasks and asked her to summarize them in her own words. The first attempts were clumsy, filled with mistakes, but Clara persisted. For the first time in her life she wasn't pretending to know. She was truly learning. Her classmates, however, weren't so quick to forgive. Some still mocked her, others ignored her entirely. Clara swallowed her pride and bore their judgment. She knew she had earned it, and only through time and effort could she regain any measure of respect. Nights that were once filled with easy lies became filled with genuine study. Slowly, Clara discovered a strange new feeling: pride, not in deceiving others, but in understanding concepts she once found impossible. Though the climb was steep for the first time, she was walking on solid ground rather than a fragile facade. Months later, Clara faced another round of exams. This time she entered the hall with no cheat sheets, no excuses, no lies, only the knowledge she had fought hard to gain. She wasn't the top student, nor did she expect to be. But when her results came back, she had passed honorably. The grade wasn't extraordinary, but the feeling was. It was hers, earned through sweat and sleepless nights, not manipulation. For the first time, Clara felt a sense of true achievement. Mr. Dawson gave her a small nod of approval, not a smile of favoritism, but a quiet acknowledgement that she was on the right path. Her classmates never fully forgot her lies, but some began to soften, offering cautious words of encouragement. Trust was not rebuilt overnight, but Clara understood now that real success required patience and integrity. The greatest lesson she carried was this: lies might win applause for a moment, but truth builds strength that lasts a lifetime. Karma had punished her, but it had also offered her a second chance. And to you, the reader, remember Clara's story well, because deception always demands a price. If you enjoyed this story and want more tales of suspense, betrayal, and redemption, don't forget to subscribe for the next chapter in our journey.